This is an additional tutorial about textures, meshes and planes, and indeed splines, which demonstrates how I use these different forms of structures to create buildings. And this is part of a buildable dockside warehouse. This is one element, and you'll see here there are these are actually attachment points, which I haven't come on to yet in my other tutorials, but I will come back to these. And these effectively act like magnets, and you can attach something else to each of them either side. Another slice. This is a slice through a dockside warehouse, so you can add other slices to it either side, but that's something to come back to. This tutorial I just want to concentrate on how I use building textures and the way to create something with as minimal polys as possible and yet retain the effect that you want. So this is at some distance. If we zoom in, we get a much better, more accurate view of what we've created, or what I've created here. And essentially it's if I go into Wireframe, you'll see it's fairly straightforward, nothing really complex here, except you've got all these sort of slice of loaf type shapes. So these are just planes, two-dimensional planes with a texture added onto them. And we've got the rear texture, which you can't really make out. There it is there. That's that sort of this colour. This piece is a single plane behind everything, and it's just got a brick texture all over it. And then I've got a three-sided or multi-sided piece here, which is essentially just a series of boxes which I've built up and then deleted unnecessary faces, and these have also got a brick texture on them, and they stand out. So if we go this way and then smooth and highlights, you can see down here it makes the plinth of the building. In fact, you've got several of them here. You've got the base here, and then you've got a piece that's stepped out there just to give it the sort of warehousey type look. There we are. Look, there's one, and then there's a plinth there, and I've put in those little pieces there because those are the things that normally they have to prevent horse-drawn carriages or other vehicles, the axles breaking the brick on the corners. They're corner protectors. You see them with old buildings. And then all the rest is actually rather just basic. This is a two-dimensional plane onto which I have added a texture, and it's the texture of the gateway there. And if we look at the number of polys on it, poly counter, it's one poly. That's all it is. And the main expense, as it were, the main hit on your graphics card is the picture of the gate, the texture that does that. And then I've got another texture there which is made to look like is actually a hatchway. And if we look at that in Wireframe, you'll see again it's just a single poly. If we just select it, one poly, and the whole thing is only 1606, which is pretty good for a building of this complexity. In fact, the main use of polys is in the dangling, what we call the gibbet crane here, and there's one there. There's another crane there of some sort. Don't know why it's standing out on its own. Must have been a good reason. Let's have a look. Oh, well, maybe it wasn't needed. Why ever is it there? It seems to be a bit of a waste. Okay, so that's something I need to check out, because obviously I've included some sort of detail there I don't actually need because it's hidden by this sort of what do they call it, a belvedere or some sort of gantry hanging there. And then the other, you can see here we've got guttering, and that always seems to take up a lot of 30 polys there. Look, and the guttering downpipe here, 132 polys. Now the way I've done this then is I've made the wall simply, that's a single face poly. There's the background wall, textured with brick, and then a three-dimensional mesh, which is as all the unnecessary faces have been pruned off, so as to give me the brick here. I know why this now. I've just thought about it. It's one of the early versions. It's the 1.1 version, and it's got a bit of old guttering there that's sticking through it, which I haven't removed yet. And the same is true here. If we look at the roof, because that was one of the issues that was raised, that is really just a triangular block, the roof. Okay, a triangular mesh. Let's see if we can just isolate it there, and I'll hide everything else. There we are, and I'll just smooth and hide. And it's a roof onto which I have put tiles or slates texture, and you can see here that it's similar to the one I used on the shed, because what has happened is that I've simply, let's go into it a bit, I've simply taken a rectangle which has got two segments. That's 1, 2. So if you imagine it flat, you've created a flat rectangle. Let me show you a box like that, and I've made sure that it has, instead of having, this is in wireframe, instead of it just having the one division, now I've gone down here to our segments and I've made 2. That means I can then convert it to poly and pick up the vertices which are going to make the pitch of the roof, and I'm going to have these ones, and where there's one hidden there, I know it's there, pick up that, and then I'm going to move through the Z axis, and that's the roof. And obviously this thickness here I've reduced it to the correct one, and then I just texture this, texture this, texture this. That's it, roof done. Doesn't take long at all, very straightforward. And if we then unhide everything else, I put in a what do they call that sort of roof, a cross gable, and just by doing exactly the same thing, and this isn't going to be seen, this is the outer one that's going to be seen, so you're going to see it as a cross gabled pitch. Okay, and I think in the final version I added a gutter or something down there, which is just a plane with 2 segments spread out across there. And then because this one here is going to be at both ends, I've just made it a single box and let it go right through the building. It doesn't matter because you're not going to see it. That's what you're going to see. And once the ends are added to it, that's it, pretty much. This sort of effect, by the way, is because these are planes, 2-dimensional planes, put very close up to the wood, and that sort of effect disappears once you load it up, export it into Trainz. And the other way to think about this, and I mean it is a very easy way of making buildings where you've got a minimal amount of 3D, just enough to sort of suggest it to the eye, but you don't want to spend a lot of your graphics loading up this as a detailed model. You're interested in the locomotives and the rolling stock and those other details. This is almost like background, and the idea is to be able to make loads of docks, dockyard warehouses, and this will just fill in, massive places where you can run sidings and have various wagons coming up and a scene of activity and all the rest of it. And the end piece is just finish off the end here. I'll show you one of those in a moment. But let me show you the list of textures which go to make this up. So there they all are. Let's get rid of the maps. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There we are. We've got the brick wall, which is this one. And we've got something called dark brick wall, which I've used, I think, down here to force, and in there, to force the eye. So it's not just the shadow in Trainz, but it actually forces the eye to accept that as a shadow, as a bit of depth. I've used planks, which are these. I've used the roof, which is this, just a small texture in the roof. Warehouse gates, that's this one down here. warehouse hatch, that's that one there, and I've created these before I made the warehouse itself. Warehouse window large, I'm not sure if I've got any of those on here, but certainly warehouse window small is there, so that one might not even be used. If I go into this one and warehouse window, where are we? If I double click on this, there we are, warehouse. So if I delete that, I wonder if anything will disappear, because if you delete texture, obviously it disappears. No, you see, warehouse window large was in the original version of this, which was a different colour brick, and then I've cloned up different, well not cloned up, but I've copied and then changed textures to produce different types of warehouses. And this is, I find, this is the way in which I like to make buildings now, although that you can make a simple box and texture it, which I've shown you before. Without interiors, they're pretty straightforward. You're producing solid blocks, but you can add quite a lot of detail. We go back up to the, we won't save that. We go back up to the list here. This was light brick door and loading hatches, or cross gable rather. So if I show you one light brick warehouse and loading hatches, no, that was this one. Let's have a look at this one, which is a variant of this. Here we are. Let's have a look at that, zoom back a bit. And you can see here all I've done is I've just changed some of the, this has now got larger windows. Again, they're just simply two-dimensional planes, but they've got that little bit there, because what I'm doing, if we were to look at the plane itself, it's two of them grouped together, so I'll just ungroup it a minute, and then we were to edit, that's been exformed as well, so I collapse that, and if we were to edit the texture, that's the texture that I created. It's got some black around it to make it a rectangle, but to make sure it's the correct power of 2 size to go there. So that's the texture that makes up that image, and it's I think it's pretty effective. And this is what I spend, as it were, the size of the file on these textures, because all of this is going to be as low poly as I possibly can, so that it'll just be not just a drag on the on your PC. And these are like it's like Lego snapping together. It's not like Lego goes on top of things. It's like two magnets joining together. It's the only way they snap together. These slices snap together. And let's open something else. We'll not save that. Let's open an end piece. Light brick wet end. They are, and the ends are just pretty straightforward, because all I've done there is I've ended it. Pretty obvious. And I've ended it with a row of very big warehouse windows, and the roof is just cross pitch. There is just ended, and here I've used different textures of brick. Let's zoom in. I've got light brick there, and this is a separate mesh here. You can see there's the separate mesh. There's one big mesh at the back of these, which is the whole of the wall, and then sticking out from there at the back of that wall. And you can see there. Can you see that? I'm asking for goodness sake. There's the whole of the back wall, and I've done that in 2 segments just to pull up the pitch to end the roof. And then in front of that back, and that's all got brick on it, just repeatedly. That I can show you by unwrapping and zooming right back. That's how many times that little texture is repeated across the whole of that end wall. And in front of that brick wall, I've added some 3-sided. Well, they start off as a simple rectangle stretched up, and they are 3-sided. And I've actually now joined them together. But these, if we look at these are just. Don't worry about these extra polys showing up here. There we are. These are the darker brick, and all I've done there is it's this face and the other face around the other side. That's darker brick, and then I've got these faces here again as a separate, oops, wrong one, as a separate, where are they? Collection. No, I haven't. That's not the one. Must be here. Make sure I get the right one. It's those. No, it must be this one here. There we are. So I've got a series of those which I've just happened to have joined together, and they're all coloured in the lighter coloured brickwork, so that I get the contrast. There we are. Look. So it's as if you've got these sort of pillars of brick sticking out from the end wall, which you have, and the ones that are facing in the same direction as the end wall are coloured in the light brick, and the ones at the side are coloured in the dark brick, because it helps the eye to see these as they are three-dimensional anyway, but it's just that little bit of emphasis which I think really helps with a building, especially when you've got that mass of brick there. It just lifts it a little bit. So that's the way in which I use planes. There's a plane, two-dimensional plane of a window, and when I'm going to do a project like this, I always do all of the textures first, so they're all ready to go, and then I start making my plans for doing a warehouse, for example. And because of this is the kind, you get kind track, kind loco parts, kind scenery. This is kind buildable, and it links together. So it slots together like a sort of component set when you're in Trainz. So you can start off with having one with a gantry hanging out. I think I've got one with it. You can start off with the end and then add as many copies of the other components which I've done. Where are we? Light brick warehouse. These are all very early versions. Look in here, across 2 cranes there. Let's have a look at that. So this is actually the first one I started with, because I wanted to do it with dockside cranes. So this takes up a bit more polys, but you can see there you've got all these loading hatches. They're all closed. I mean, they're actually just planes in front of it, just slightly in front of the brick. And then these are 3D models of those characteristic wall-mounted cranes that you used to get in the docks. And you can see over here at the back, it's just a slice through doing exactly the same thing. I mean, if I wanted to, I could have just made that blank brick, but I like to think that there's the idea is there's going to be a dock there and a dock there, and there's going to be sidings along there in front of each side, and things are going to be happening. You can shunt about to your heart's content. And again, the roof is just simply the way I showed you, by taking a rectangle, 2 segments, and just lifting the middle vertices in order to get the height. And if we actually look into it, a whole load of things disappear, because all those unnecessary sides have been deleted. But if we start adding slice of this, and then a bit with a cross gable, and then another slice of that maybe, and then some just blank bits, you can really vary what it is you want as your dock warehouse. But more importantly, when you're making an ordinary building, an industrial building, or a fancy building of any sort, or any sort of building, essentially go for the lowest possible meshes that you can, and prepare the textures first and drop them on. I find as two-dimensional planes. If you want to have a really complex building with lots of 3 dimensions to it, and you've got a complex texture, then my advice would be to break it down into its components. That is, windows, try and make a texture which is just the standard window that's going to be repeated across the building. If you've got pillars, you might just like to make those out of a mesh and to texture them with the colour of the building. If they're fancy pillars with fluting and things like that, well, if you've got a fluting sort of texture, then you can repeat that up and down the pillar as often as you like. Doorways, that sort of thing. You can be as complex as you like, really, or as simple as you like. These are quite simple because they're designed to be quite low, make a low demand on Trainz. But there's others. I mean, if I come up here into my models folder, I'll show you. I made some models for the station, the old Great Western Railway station at Broughton-on-the-Water in Gloucestershire, Great Western Railway. And you can see there's various buildings, and this is the station building, I hope. Let's have a look, see what we got there. Yeah, this is me beginning with the station building. Well, it's actually for me beginning with the signal box. I don't know why I've got it under station building. And you can see I've got a couple of diagrams already in the correct size as textures on the on planes. See, they disappear. And I've made a start on creating sides which have depth, and I've made them by using the rectangle editable spline. And here I've got other editable splines which I'm going to join with that, and it'll create this effect here. Doesn't illustrate it brilliantly. Maybe that's the station house. No, there's nothing in the station house. Nothing in the goods shed. This is rather worrying because I have produced a whole load of. Maybe the goods shed might give you an idea. Let's have a look at that. There we go, there's the goods shed, and this has got a whole, this is a solid building in part and also an open building in part. Here's the goods shed, and it's the open part is obviously with a platform for unloading and loading, and you're going to run a track through there, and you can have the Trainz industry track in there if you want to, and this is for wagons to be loaded up, or lorries, or whatever it is. And so that I've made this up in three main sections. That's this open section here, and then these two side offices which are solid. So they are made up in the same way as the warehouse, with a series of textures on top of the mesh shapes of the office. So those windows, you can't see through them, but these ones you can, and they've got actual glass. This is a fake glass texture that I use. And these have actually got glass, or glass texture, which I've shown you how to produce actually in them. And when you look inside, you can see that there's the doors again. This is a fully modelled doors with cross timbers using a basic planks texture. Run your wagon, run your covered van in there. Have some parcels or boxes or whatever on the goods platform, and maybe a figure or two in there, and stick a lorry or something that's loading or unloading here, and there you go. You've got your goods shed, and as long as that's an industry track, you'll be able to shunt wagons in there, and it will load and unload and all the rest of it. So the textures there, if you look at the textures, here they are. Look, we've got glass, we've got platform, we've got roof. This one, we've got the shed door, vertical planking, that's here, and window, so that's actually that one there. And again, the roof is made in exactly the same way as I always make my roofs, which is a box made with two segments, and so it's out this shape, and I just pull the segment up, and then I adjust the width to exactly what I want. And then these are just rectangles. That one's got a gutter coming down. Look, there's a drain pipe there. They tend to take up a lot of polys. You can see there's the gutter, look. So that takes up quite a lot of polys, but you know, they're nice little details to have. And on this one, if I wanted to, I could have put a little point up here on the chimney and have had smoke coming out of it, but I decided it was too warm a day for that, and so I left it without any smoke. So I'm hoping that has answered quite a few of your questions, or at least some of your concerns about it. That texture there isn't that brilliant, is it? Look, I can see a definite line along there, but it's a good shed, so well, maybe they just made it up with just whatever wood that was available. But you can see, if you're not careful, you can begin to get a bit of a tartany sort of pattern appearing, a blocky pattern repetitively there. I think it's okay for this, but you know, you've got to be a bit judicious in your use of repeating the textures. To sum up then, I would, where there is an industrial building or something like this, a goods shed where you've got different faces, but especially let's look back at that warehouse end, especially where you want to have a bit of depth in the building. You can see there I've not got much depth there. Then my advice is to use a mix to create the background of the building, the main skin as it were of the building, either as a box or as a collection of two-dimensional editable splines which you then texture across, extrude and texture, and then delete the other faces that you don't need, and add in reduced meshes, that is meshes where you've tidied up the number of faces so you're not wasting polys, and you can be as simple or as complex, but the key with all this to make it look like something is to ensure that you have a collection of good textures to begin. Otherwise it will not look good no matter what you do. So you can either be super pernickety and have all sorts of different depths here with all sorts of different little bits of mesh and everything, and then finally at the back the overall mesh which is going to fill in all the gaps between these individual meshes. For example, if I was just to hide that, it'll show you what I mean, that I've created all of these, and then there's a flat canvas at the back which provides the solidity to the building. So you can do that, or you can make a standard box as your building and then add extra details to the outside of it, and the roof always a separate roof because you've got to overhang. So just taking a box up and then pitching the top face isn't going to do it. You need to overhang always if you look at any roof. And that's the other thing, you will now find yourself going round looking at buildings with a new eye. Try and imagine, look at something, no matter how modern it is, but especially brick built buildings, have a look at it and think, how would I make a model of that building? Which are the separate, which is the core features and which are the separate additional features which I can model separately and add to create the effect of something very substantial. You can see there actually that I've got different faces even in here. There's a cross piece there, look, which would show up. That was the dark brick and would show up here. So I've actually got quite a shallow mesh going across there and more deeper meshes going up the top. And when you come down to the base of the building, we'll keep going, it's a tall one. Then I've angled these and carefully made sure that the textures that I've textured it 3 bricks wide at an angle, and also try to make this texture the same number of bricks per length as this. And it's not easy. You have to get used to it, and you have to think what you're doing very carefully when you're texturing with brick. But if it's a smooth masonry finish, then of course you can just get away with slapping the old texture on, because it won't repeat so much. But even that's probably better than that My Good Shed, because you can't see much of a repeat there. I mean, I can see it looking at it now, and you get that sort of moire, those curves of moire curves. That's just the rendering that Gmax is doing at the moment. If you zoom right in, you can see that, and that's going to be more than enough to cap on the end of warehouses, for example, for a dockside. There is one last aspect on making anything in Gmax which I just want to stress on this one, and that is never use this tool, mirror. Don't mirror anything, because mirror might look okay. It might be that you want to build this end, and then instead of making the other end the same, or make another end and use this as the basis of the other end, so it need to be facing in the other direction, you might think, oh, I'll just mirror this, and it produce a mirror image. Let me show you. If I hit mirror, now obviously I'm not going to save this. Give me the axis. Well, that's not going to do it, is it? So let's try another axis. There we go, look. And it appears, there we go, and it appears to have immediately created the other end. And you can XREF it, and you can make sure the center pivot is alright, but I guarantee you put that into Trainz and it will look like rubbish. because there is something in that mirror function which will now reverse the face on which all these textures appear. So instead of it appearing solid, a solid end, in fact the texture will be on the inside and it will look like you're looking into the building. And instead of there being, and this of course is the direction you won't be seeing because it's hidden by the other bits that you add onto the warehouse, and instead this effect looking like this will be what you see here. It never works. And in the early days when Ricky and I were making locomotives for the first time, or indeed anything for the first time, we used that mirror function quite a lot, and it was always our downfall. What we had to do, if you know the term bilateral symmetry, in other words, if you slice it down the middle it's the same, one side is the mirror of the other, or on a locomotive for example, the wheels on one side, you could, instead of doing anything, instead of cloning them to make the wheels on the other side, you could copy and mirror the ones that you've done, and they appear to be fine on the other side. They are not. They always have to be redone. That's why I always say, if you want to use something, so if we go back to this, we'll unmirror this if we possibly can. See, it's not accepting those commands. And that's the other thing. There's no commands there. We can't unmirror it. Once you use that mirror command, you are doomed. Never use mirror. Take my word for it. Oh, play around with it by all means. Put it into Trainz if you like. You'll see the mess that you'll make, but just waste your time. Don't use that. Don't mirror selected objects. So that's how I'm going to conclude. This is an addenda tutorial, which I'm going to push back. It's not number 13. It's going to be number whatever it is. It's an addenda to the planes, adding detail for the shed, for the line side shed. It's an additional tutorial branching off from that, just to answer a few points. And so I hope it does do that. Do email or make comments and I'll aim to answer those points. And please subscribe to my channel and recommend my channel to other people, and get it out there, because I think this is the great thing to do, is to make your own models for Trainz. It is so satisfying, it really is, and it's addictive, and I can't recommend it too highly, because the satisfaction you receive from actually creating something and putting it into Trainz that you have made yourself is something else. And I always give all my models away free. They're always a freeware available for download, and I'm really pleased when other people find enjoyment from them. So as I say, do have a go at this and experiment, and I'll be back with tutorial number 13, continuing the animation of the bogey in a day or so.